that people can see it. Do you all basically see? Okay. You guys can come around. Just have a seat for a second. You know, last week when they did the chapel, the chancel of drama, it really was so good. I said, I can't do something like that again because I would just kind of get old. So what I decided to do is since we celebrate the memory, the honor of this extraordinary Christian, I wanted to sort of ask you or teach you a little bit about who he really was and what he has to offer for us. Look at the icon. Okay? Everything in that, remember, icon is an Eastern Christian understanding of the divine. It's not a painting, it's not a picture. They don't paint icons in their own language, they write icons because they're writing the story of God as a door into the sacred. So who is Francis and what does he have to show us? Why is that icon the way it is? Francis was born about 800 years ago in Italy, in the little town of Assisi. Anyone here actually been to Assisi other than myself? Good. It's a tiny little village right in the middle of the mountain. Okay? Like when they have an earthquake, the village can go over. And they had an earthquake there several years ago and did tremendous damage. It's right in the middle of Italy. It's always been the poor sister to Siena. It's always been the little village, the little train that could. Well, Francis was a child of wealth. He was born in an upper middle class family. His father was a silk merchant who he wasn't Donald Trump, but he wasn't hurting either. Okay? And Francis was a typical young man at the time. He liked to party, he liked to be irresponsible, he liked to be a guy. Okay, so you women, when you think of guys, that's what he was. Oh boy. His father had great plans for him. His father wanted him to go into the family business, and Francis probably would have thought of it. But one of the things he really had a very idealistic, unrealistic view of war. So he wanted to be a knight. He wanted to be a soldier. And he actually enlisted and became a knight and was injured in war and taken prisoner and became a POW for a year. And his father eventually had to ransom him out and bring him home. And now his father said, okay, now that you got that out of your system, I want you to take over the family business. And Francis came back from war changed. He was still a young man. He still had, you women know this, guys sometimes tend to be very literal. We don't think things through. We just kind of, I see a couple of heads are nodding yes, but they're doing this don't. Okay, it's true. In this particular time when he was trying to find himself, as he writes in his own diaries, he perceives the word of God or the voice of God saying to him, Francis, I need you to rebuild my church. Francis, I need you to rebuild my church. He keeps hearing this as he writes this story. So, being literal, what he did, he went to his father's shop, took a whole bunch of silk, sold it, went out and bought the tools and the wood and the stone. He went down to this poor little church, which is in the Cartry, and he literally rebuilt this chapel himself because he thought that's what God was asking him to do. This did not endear him to his father when his father found out that he had taken some of the stuff out of the store, sold it, and kept the money for himself to rebuild the church. So his father was really angry with him. Francis, trying to deal with what is God asking of me? He went to talk to the local bishop, and the bishop said something very profound. He said, you know, God's going to give you whatever you need. Don't worry about what people think. Don't worry about what people say. Whatever you need to do, God will give it to you. This brings us to something that really happened. This is not legend. Again, because being a guy, kind of literal, if God's going to give me everything, then I'm going to give back everything that anyone ever gave to me, including the clothes from his back. And there is an icon similar to that in the churches of Assisi, where Francis confronts his father, takes off all his clothes, leaves it, gives it back to his father, and he walks away from his family, with literally as if he were born, with no clothes on. And the only thing he can wear is a very rough burlap brown sack, which is always depicted in the robes that Franciscans wear. But originally he was just wearing a burlap sack. That's all he wore. He began to take Christ really seriously. He gave up everything to live with the poor and to serve the poor, to live with the sick and to serve the sick. Because he believed, finally, if you're going to be a Christian, you not only have to talk about Jesus and know about Jesus, you've got to know Jesus, you've got to live the way he lived. To be poor, to be with those who have so little. And then his life began to open up. He began to serve God in a special way. He began to notice that we human beings, we should see the beauty in God's creation. And he was the first person to say, we have an obligation to take care of the world around us. And he was the first person to preach that. You don't destroy our environment. He was an environmentalist before we invented the word. He was a person so much at peace with himself and his God that he actually, by legend, he was able to deal with animals. And they tell lovely stories about him. Some of them probably true, some of them probably exaggerated. You'll notice in the icon there's always birds in there. Francis writes in his diary he loved to preach to the birds because they love to hear about the Word of God. Sometimes birds would listen better than people. All right? There's always a wolf in an icon of Francis. And the reason for that is they tell the legend of the story there was a wolf that was raiding a small village and killing the animals. And Francis goes out and basically meets with the wolf and says to the wolf, dude, there's enough food out here for you. You don't need to be killing these animals. And the wolf, seeing the holy man, agrees to do it. Now that's the legend and it's sweet, but it just gives an idea of just how much at peace he was with nature. That was what they were trying to teach. He is the first person who decided that, look, if people can't read and there aren't enough priests to preach about the important things of Jesus, we have to act it out. So come Christmas time, he gathers people together. He takes the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke. He asks people to play roles, and he is the founder of the Christmas pageant. He was the one who invented the pageant for a non-literate people. He used real animals in the pageant, in the stable. Claudia, we're not going to use real animals. Please. All of those things are important enough, but I want to mention something that never gets talked about, which in the culture, in our own very dangerous age, I think would be good to hear. One of the greatest things Francis ever did was one of the things that nobody ever gives him credit for, and that is he stopped a war. The Fifth Crusade was, and those of you who know about the Crusades, they were for, I'm sorry.
Can she sit down?
Are you getting tired? Okay. Today is her birthday. She's 17 today. This is a very this is a strong, modern young woman. If it were me, I'd have to sit. You all know I've heard of Crusades. I'm not going to go into the details of the Crusades. There were several of them. The Fifth Crusade was being fought through Egypt. And the Christian armies and the Islamic armies under the Sultan of Egypt, whose name was Al-Malik al-Kamil, faced off against each other. Remember, Francis himself had been a soldier. He understood that the bottom line in war, what does war do? It breaks things and kills people. That's what war does. He saw it. And as a man of peace and as a man of God, he crossed the no man's land and met with the Sultan. They went into the tent alone, and nobody knows what they said because the Sultan cleared out his people. So there was just the two of them alone. I guess you could call it a closed-door meeting or a closed-flat meeting, whatever, in the tent. But it was just the two of them for about a week or so. When they left, both parties, Francis got the Christian soldiers to go home. He got the Muslim soldiers to go home. The battle was never fought. And although Francis himself never spoke about what he said with the Sultan afterwards had said, and he wrote in his writings, if all Christians were like this man, there would never be war again. We sang that song in the beginning, O Creatures of Our God and King, and it's part of something that Francis wrote called Canticle to the Sun, Canticle of Creation. And the words are put to music. And it talks about the beauty of creation and all the wonderful things, the animals and the beauty of nature. Francis, first of all, was not a very big man. He was short. He was about 4'11". He wasn't even 5 feet. I've been to where his cot was. But he cast a giant shadow. He died a very young man. He was 49 when he died. Got so much done in such a little amount of time. But the thing that struck me about this beautiful, and when we sing, we look at the words of the opening song, we're going to sing the final 3 verses at the end. When he wrote that canticle, he couldn't see anything of which he was writing. He was blind and crippled. He saw the beauty of creation without human eyes, because he saw it through religious wars that still haunt our world. Think of the person who stood apart, an extraordinary person whom we honor today. Francis was one of the greatest human beings of all time. And I always find it interesting, I tell my canon law students that this is a very humbling thing. How many of you in college had to read the Divine Comedy, either in English or the original at all? Okay? You notice Dante pretty much puts all priests and bishops in hell. In the Divine Comedy, he does. There's only 3 clergy he puts in heaven in the Divine Comedy. Okay? John Gratian, you don't have to know about it, he's a canon lawyer. Thomas Aquinas,